Hey there, Patriots. So I wanted to start out by pointing out what you're looking at. So the sheet that you should have in front of you should say quadrilateral hierarchy. What this means is when we have quadrilaterals, remember quadrilateral is a polygon with four sides, that they relate to each other in a certain way. So at the very top we have quadrilaterals because everything with four sides is a quadrilateral. Every polygon with four sides is a quadrilateral. Now, some of those quadrilaterals just have four sides and that's it. Now, but some of them have the properties of a parallelogram. So some quadrilaterals are parallelograms, but if we work our way up, we can see the only way to be a parallelogram is to be a quadrilateral. Parallelograms then break into two branches called a rhombus and a rectangle. Today we're going to talk about a rhombus. So what we're seeing here is every rhombus is a parallelogram. Every rhombus is a parallelogram because before I can get down to be a rhombus, I have to go through the parallelograms. Every rectangle is a parallelogram, and we're going to go over this again. So if you're not following it, that's okay. We're going to be hitting this up again and again and again. And then at the very bottom of our hierarchy chain, we have squares. Every square is a rhombus. Every square is a rectangle. Rhombus and a rectangle, every one of those is a parallelogram. Okay? So we know a rhombus, because it's a parallelogram, meets all the properties of a parallelogram, and it meets all the properties of a quadrilateral. Well, what are the properties of a quadrilateral? I am so glad that you asked. A quadrilateral is a polygon with four sides. A polygon with four sides is a quadrilateral. Well, what else do we know? We know the angles. The angles in a quadrilateral have a sum, that means I can add them up, of 360 degrees. So the angles of the quadrilateral, if I add them up, are always 360 degrees. Now, so parallelograms were right underneath that, so parallelograms have to meet those rules. A parallelogram has four sides. One, two, it does. The angles of a parallelogram have to add up to 360 because that's what was set up above. That's for all quadrilaterals. But if you remember, parallelograms have special rules. They had opposite sides have to be parallel. That's a parallelogram. Opposite sides needed to be congruent. Opposite angles have to be congruent. Consecutive or same side angles, consecutive angles or my same side angles have to be supplementary. And lastly, diagonals bisect each other. The diagonals in the parallelogram will cut each other in half. Okay, so those are the rules for a parallelogram. That's what separates the parallelograms from the other quadrilaterals. Now, we said we're going to add a rhombus to the list. So a rhombus will have all of these properties because if you look back, the rhombus is underneath the parallelograms. A rhombus will have all the properties of that parallelogram. So a rhombus will have opposite sides are parallel. I'm not going to write them down because that was the property up above it. Opposite sides are congruent. I'm not going to write that down because that's the property of a parallelogram. But because this is a rhombus, the sides are special. On a rhombus, we know all my sides are congruent. That's what makes that a parallelogram into a rhombus. If I give you a parallelogram that has four congruent sides, it's a rhombus. Opposite angles are congruent. That's still true. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Still true. Diagonals bisect each other. Still true. But because it's a rhombus, we have two rules about the diagonals. My diagonals are going to be perpendicular to each other, and the diagonals are going to bisect the angles of the rhombus. So the angles in the corners, those angles and these angles get cut in half. When I draw in my diagonal, it cuts these angles in half, and that the diagonals have to be perpendicular to each other. Now that's a little hard to see, so you may want to flip it over to the back and maybe draw out these properties specifically on your rhombus. So if you have any questions, please come into class with those. In the next video, we will be talking about a rectangle. So Patriots, we will see you when we see you, and we hope you have a good one.